Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Bickers, and I work at the Credit Union teaching financial education. I'm particularly excited about our special webinar for May, Money Strategies That Work with Your Brain. This class has been designed for Mental Health Awareness Month, which is May, and in conjunction with some folks that I have been working on, where we have been studying how to create financial education that is neuro-inclusive, and also through the teams at Int and Wings Credit Union, where we have done a lot of work to research financial psychology and look for ways to improve financial education for folks with brains in mind. Before I joined the team and taught financial education, I taught high school English, so I have many years of education experience, and I've been on the team here for 4.5 years. Again, super, super excited for our May special webinar, Money Strategies That Work with Your Brain. In today's presentation, we are going to talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about how to understand your brain when it comes to money. We're going to really focus on ways to build hopefully easier systems that align with the way that brains work surrounding money. And we're going to talk about managing money with compassion because, as we'll see, sometimes when we're navigating financial systems and trying to create plans for our money, there might be a component that brings up shame that we might be trying to navigate with as we're discussing this topic. The first thing that we really wanted to kind of introduce is that this class is indeed designed with brains in mind. Many traditional money systems or approaches might assume something like focus or consistency or low stress. And in reality, that is not the environment everybody has. That's not how all brains work. And that's okay, but it might mean that a lot of traditional financial education or traditional money systems might not work for everybody. There might have been challenges that have come up or frustrations. Somebody might have tried something and found that it didn't work with them. And it might have led to that frustration when trying to navigate financial systems or reach financial goals. So this session is specifically designed to support different attention styles, motivation styles, energy levels, and hopefully introduce some concepts that we can consider that can help us reach our financial goals with our brains in mind rather than working against them. Note that these strategies might be especially helpful for folks who are neurodivergent, have neurodivergent brains, but it is also designed with universal design theory in mind, which is the idea that something that might help a smaller subset of group is also something that might help everybody because these are tools or resources that we can use to reach, in this case, our financial goals. The first thing that we want to introduce is just a moment to think. So I want everybody to take a moment to finish this sentence. No need to judge it, just notice what comes up and note that there's no right or wrong answer here. But take a moment in your head to just think, when it comes to money, I am blank, and fill that out. You might think of one thing, you might think of a few things, but just take a second to finish that sentence in your head. What we are doing here is we are using this sentence to come up with some of what's called your I am statements surrounding money. These reflect your identity with how you manage money or how you address money, how you think about yourself surrounding money. And this also can reflect a lot of your money beliefs or money emotions. One thing that I really want to emphasize here is this part about not judging it or not ascribing what we think should be the right or wrong answer here. A lot of times when engaging with financial systems, we might have associations or belief from experiences and from trying to navigate society that make us think that there's some way that we should navigate money, some way that we should make the financial decisions or goals that we should have. And that should a lot of times can lead to shame when it comes to navigating money, especially if financial systems that are talked about or that we've tried to use in the past aren't things that work with our brains. So one thing that we'll challenge with today's session is any shame associated, any shoulds that come up. And just note that these I am statements are informative. Sometimes they're things that help us reach our financial goals. Sometimes they're things that we might need to kind of address more and think about and challenge more to reach our financial goals. But just make note of what came up there. The next thing that we want to talk about is how a lot of these I am statements and our beliefs around money or financial choices are influenced by more than just the math or financial literacy, financial education. It's influenced by our relationships and culture. So, how we're taught to spend, save, and share, what we've heard people say about money, what that financial situation might mean as far as how it impacts our relationship with other people, or what that culture really tells us to do with our money, maybe to support our family, to support our friends, or to support our communities. Our financial decisions are also influenced by our identity and our emotions. So, this is where those I am statements really might come into play, but it's how we see ourselves and oftentimes how we feel in that specific moment that might lead to those different financial decisions. And our financial choices are influenced by past experiences. So, things that have happened in the past in financial psychology, a lot of these past experiences that lead to financial decisions are referred to as financial flashpoints. They're moments or experiences that have led us to learn lessons about money and then come away with beliefs that we have that will apply to future scenarios. They may be positive, negative, they may be related to a lot of different things, but they could be wins, losses, or systemic barriers as well. So, when we're addressing this, noting that a lot of times when we're navigating money, especially if we've engaged with some sort of financial education, either formally or informally in the past, we probably know what textbook wise we might could do with budgeting, with credit, with any of the financial topics that could get us to our goals or reach the outcomes we have heard might be outcomes you could work toward. But when you're thinking about that, navigating that, a lot of those systems or approaches, as we've introduced, might not always work with all brains. And so, as I've said many times, we'll see some different strategies that might approach this hopefully a little bit differently. The next thing to think about is to reaffirm that you are the expert in your money journey. A lot of times, we might, especially if our I am statements about money aren't as, um, you know, confident as we might want them to be, we might have some doubt here when it comes to money. And so checking in with this and saying, hey, wait a minute, we're making financial decisions with the best tools that we possibly have. And a lot of times, our brain is making financial decisions that intends to protect us, intends to protect the people we care about, intends to take care of something, but those financial decisions might not always align with those traditional financial rules or what we've heard we quote unquote should do. So this is the idea of checking in and saying we're not bad with money. Again, there's no good, bad, right, wrong. Our brain is doing the best that it possibly can to navigate a complex system. A lot of times the financial decisions that we make that might not reach that specific goal that we have in mind or that specific goal that financial literacy has told us we, again, quote unquote, should work toward, there's still a reason behind that financial decision that we're making. It's our brain trying to, again, navigate that complex system as best as possible, trying to help us out, even if that help might not feel like help in the moment or might not be the help we wish our brain was giving us to reach that goal that we've named. But it's still trying to do something that helps us, typically as people, navigate that system as best as possible. So just making note of that there and honoring that. Another thing that might come up as a part of this that I've introduced a bit already is that when we're navigating finances, we can find ourselves in some sort of psychological loop when it comes to money. What this loop looks like is something will happen that might lead to some level of financial anxiety or stress. And because that is an uncomfortable scenario to be in, an uncomfortable situation to be in, our brains might have some level of avoidance with that, not want to engage with that stress that we feel about money. And then when we avoid those situations, we might feel shame. We're not doing the things that we intended on doing, that we said we do, that we need to do. And then we might experience consequences of that emotional feeling, that literal like downside to that scenario that then reinforces the anxiety here. One example to pose here, one way this might look is let's take a situation where somebody gets a bill in the mail that they're afraid they're not going to be able to pay. So they're in a stressful financial situation, they get that bill in the mail, they're worried about it. When they get the bill in the mail, they might feel anxiety, feel stress. I'm worried I'm not going to be able to pay this. I'm stressed out about this. So they might not open that particular bill because they're stressed out about it and they don't want to engage with that. And that might lead to those feelings of shame. That might lead to the consequences of literally having late fees, having extra payments, going through that could harm somebody's credit, lead to notable negative financial results that somebody might want to avoid, and then reinforce that anxiety, those negative feelings that somebody has about money and lead to this cycle. Note that these loops are common. A lot of folks might experience this for one reason or the other because many money scenarios can indeed be stressful and lead to this cycle. But they can also be interrupted. That doesn't mean that's easy. Obviously, this is one of those psychological things that can be quite challenging. So, when we're approaching trying to disrupt some of these psychological loops that we might experience surrounding money, we recommend approaching it as gently as possible, noting when it comes up first, just increasing that awareness, and then start challenging it, perhaps through some of the strategies we'll introduce here in a bit. Now that we've talked about psychological loops, we do want to get into some of our strategies. So the idea here is that we're seeking systems that align with our brain, noting that there's no one right way to manage money. There's a lot of advice out there, a lot of things that may have helped in the past, might help in the future, might be or might not be helping right now. But the idea here is to think about how your brain works, all of the nuances that are unique to you. And note that we're not trying to change who you are. We're simply introducing systems that might work with your brain. We will go through 10 specific strategies or systems to consider. The idea here is to pick the ones that you think will work for you. Maybe it's all of them, maybe it's not, maybe it's one or two, but note that some might not align. The other thing I want to note right now that we'll kind of cover a little bit more toward the end is that these systems are meant to help with how brains work, but they're not a replacement for all things that might help. They're meant to help build systems, meant to help navigate that, but it's not going to solve every single problem we might have related to money, especially when we think about how our brains work. So hopefully some of these systems help, but they're not meant to be solve all solutions. The first one we want to talk about is one of my favorites. If I have like any overall takeaway from this presentation, it's automate what you can. That's like if I had to sum up one point, and that's why I really like starting with this. But the idea is to automate systems to reduce mental load. So this is automating anything and everything in your finances that you absolutely want to happen. So this might be setting bills to auto pay, setting savings to move automatically. So those automatic savings transfers, automatic moving money to different accounts that you absolutely want to take care of. This reduces a decision fatigue. This takes decisions off your plate. It makes sure your goals are met. It's setting up those systems to happen without you having to remember or to interact with it. One thing I will share with you all is that one of the issues I've had in my own financial journey is struggling with memory. It can be challenging for me to remember everything. I oftentimes am that person who feels like people have memory better than I do, where they're able to more easily remember how to do things or when to do things. And that's something that's been frustrating for me. So when I was able to automate my systems to make sure I was meeting my goals and taking care of things, it made a huge difference in me making sure my bills were paid and me reaching my financial goals. But as we'll see with all of the systems that we share, all of the strategies and ideas we share, there might be a downside or something to consider because these things, as I said, aren't something that's going to work for everybody. So automation works great when you have those funds available and when you know that automation can absolutely happen. But if you're in a situation where your income fluctuates or those expenses fluctuate a lot, or you're in a period where those funds aren't immediately available for whatever reason, you might not be able to automate in that moment. Automate when you're able to, it can help a lot, but it isn't something that would work for everyone. The next strategy that we have to talk about also helps with memory, and it's the idea to increase visibility to support that working memory. So this is turning on app notifications, calendar notifications. For some folks, this might look like literal sticky notes everywhere or something else that helps a lot with that memory piece. The idea is to keep spending and due dates as top of mind as possible. For me, what this looks like is turning on with any of my financial apps notifications for them. So anytime I spend on something or pay for something or do something financially, I get those notifications that pop up, and that really helps make my financial journey much more visible. The downside to this is that if those notifications increase financial stress, it might feel overwhelming, or especially if they're too frequent. So again, think what's going to work for me, what's going to help me reach my goals. For me, I need a lot of visibility, but again, that might not work for everybody. The next one that we have is especially for folks that have a lot of stress or anxiety when they might get started to engage with their finances, when they're just figuring out, like, where do I start? I have a big list of all these financial goals I'm working on. I don't really know where to start. So it's the idea of simplifying the start just to start getting engaged with it. There are a few different ways you might approach this, but one, you could use coin flips or micro tasks. So coin flips for me, it's literally just like if you have two decisions, you flip a coin and pick one. Or for what I do is it's called the Wheel of Names. And so it's a website you can go to and you can type the list of all of the things that you have to do. It puts it in the wheel, you let the wheel decide. Micro tasks would be to start with something really, really small, like perhaps opening one statement, rather than saying we're going to look at the past 3 months of expenses, like a lot of financial advice might recommend. It's starting with that small thing. Both of these strategies break that stalemate that might be caused by fear or anxiety about finances, or that research kind of fatigue that somebody might get into when they're trying to figure out all the decisions. It says we're just going to get started, we're going to do something. The downside of this is that it works really well when those particular financial situations might be relatively low stakes, where all of the options on the list have kind of equal playing field. And it doesn't super matter which one you start with. If there's one that's absolutely a priority or a need, it might make more sense just to go ahead and knock that off the list and then leave all of the other smaller tasks to something like a coin flip or a wheel. But even if it is a really big financial task and getting started with it is something where that brings up a lot of stress or anxiety, or you just like haven't been able to get started with it for whatever reason, starting with that micro task and saying, okay, we're going to do a very small part of it so that way we're able to just get the ball rolling and get going. And a lot of folks find that once they get started with that smaller thing, they continue to complete the whole task. This also isn't a complete substitute for researching all of the things somebody might need to research in different financial scenarios, or if you have that preference to really research. So as I mentioned, I use this one a lot for things where I just really need to get going, but I also still do a lot of financial research, both through my job and in my own personal life, to make sure I'm making informed financial decisions, and use this when I know I've done enough research, things just really need to happen, and I make that list and start this way. The next one we have is to use association to build sustainable habits. So in the research that we've compiled for this presentation, one of the texts that we have consulted several times, and it shows up in a lot of our financial education presentations, is James Clear's Atomic Habits. He talks about how to build habits that you would like to have and talks about the psychology behind habit change. So if that's something you find interesting, I highly recommend you check it out. But one of the ideas that he introduces in that text that I really love is the idea of habit stacking. So it's pairing something that you already do with something that you desire to do. So that way your brain builds that association of, oh, we're doing this thing that I already do on a regular basis, and now's when we do this new thing. And you can apply this to your money goals as well. So if you have a money task that you would like to do, you like checking your budget or maybe opening a statement, you might pair it with something like morning coffee. So morning coffee, open up the budgeting app, see how we're doing, see how that goes. So the idea is those micro tasks that we might have talked about paired with habit stacking to reduce that task initiation anxiety that might have happened. The downside of this is it might be hard to build that consistency and stack for some people. So if you are finding yourself in a place where you're able to build that association and you have habits that exist, that can be great. But remembering to add that habit to the habit you already have could be a challenge for some folks and might not work in every scenario. The next one that we have is to use a money buddy to help with accountability for financial goals. So internal accountability in financial goals might work for some people, but some folks find that they might need external accountability to reach certain financial goals or other goals that they might have. So this is really bringing into the concept that you might have heard of called body doubling, where you just bring somebody into your space who is non-judgmental, who you trust. They don't even have to really talk to you about money. They just have to be there while you're working on your financial goals. So it increases that accountability, provides that safe space to balance the feelings of shame, and it can help with attention and emotional regulation. But if you don't have that person who's available to sit with you, that might be a challenge. I will say we'll talk about our financial coaches at the end, but if you don't have somebody to talk to about money, especially somebody who's non-judgmental, our financial coaches could be a great resource to connect with to start that conversation and work on your goals. And then I have also heard that there are body doubling like websites or spaces where you can go to and say, hey, I just like need somebody to hang out while I check my budget or review my budget or make a budget or something like that. And again, they're not asking you questions about your finances or kind of engaging with you on that sense. They're just there while you do it to help provide that safe space for completing whatever task you have in mind. The next one that we have is to limit choices to maintain momentum. A lot of times, cognitive overload, decision fatigue, having an overwhelming number of things can lead us to have some level of paralysis in maintaining that momentum, checking a budget. There's just things can become very overwhelming pretty quickly. So it's the idea of having simple rules to help our financial goals, like pay yourself first. What this might look like is rather than having an overly complex budget, something where you have line items for every category, you say, here are my savings goals, here's what I want to work toward, and you reverse budget where you reach those financial goals first, put those savings aside to make sure you're reaching them, and then spend whatever else you have. It also might look like setting spending or credit caps in your apps, so that way you're not thinking, okay, how are things working out? You just have those caps set and you keep it relatively simple. That reduces the daily decision making, reduces the mental math, and lowers that cognitive overload. But it doesn't work for everybody. As we said, some folks might prefer to have more detailed control. They might not be in scenarios where they're able to just follow simple rules. Things might be more complicated. So if it does work, then use that one. But if it doesn't, there are other strategies to consider. The next one is to build a buffer to protect your plan. The idea here is to really include space for things that are realistic about your financial journey, things that are unique to maybe you. And this again might contradict some typical financial advice that might be out there. This is including space in your budget for impulse purchases, for social invites, making sure real life fits into your plan. For me, I found myself in a space where I was making a lot of consider like impulse purchasey buys or things where I like got into something and was spending on that category and I hadn't like really planned that I would get that hobby beforehand. And so before I built that room for like spending, but I don't know what it's going to be on, I found it hard to keep up with my budget realistically. So when I was able to get into that space to have a budget for, I don't know what I'm going to spend it on, but this is like my fun, my impulse buy, my flexible purchasing budget, it really made a difference to make sure that my budget was a lot more realistic for me moving forward. But if your current income doesn't allow for that margin or those extras right now, it might be very difficult to build that buffer. So working toward perhaps building that buffer as a goal could be helpful, but again, not a strategy that's going to work for everyone. We have just a few more. This idea is to create a menu to manage mood spending. Elise Fulmore wrote a book called Keeping Finance Personal, where that was my first introduction to this concept. But it's having a literal menu of free rewards that you can give yourself when you're in that situation where you really want to spend, because spending does increase dopamine, but you don't have the budget for it, especially at that moment. So you have a list of free or low cost items, and it satisfies that literal chemical need that we have for dopamine without costing us quite a bit of money. The downside to this is if you know you might misplace or forget to check the list, that might not be helpful in all scenarios. The last two include aligning goals to stay connected to your values. So, the financial psychology researchers, Doctors Ted and Brad Klontz, did a study that they called the Sentimental Savings Study. And they found that folks that have a visual connection to their budget, like a literal sentimental, emotional connection to their savings goals, were 300% more likely to reach their savings goals than the control group that just kind of like said, we're going to abstract save and didn't build that sentimental connection to their savings. So using something like an account nickname for your goals keeps your why visible, helps you stay connected to what matters. But the downside is if your goals change often or you don't have something that really builds that sentiment, the strategy might not work for you. The last one we have is the idea of separating accounts to create mental boundaries. This works great when combined with something like that sentimental savings concept. So having accounts for different things like bills or fun can provide that instant visual for how much is available in each category. This reduces the mental math, but watch out for that if that need for monitoring multiple accounts feels overwhelming. Me personally, I like to keep it relatively simple and I don't have this many accounts because that's not something that works for me. The last few things I want to mention include making sure we check in on regulation before calculation. Financial tasks happen a lot more easily when you are able to be calm and focused. So if you notice that anxiety and avoidance increasing, consider a few things like building a safety net with automation if you're able, lower that energy cost of starting, use support to challenge shame, and design for real life and not perfection. With that, we challenge you to move this knowledge to action if you're able to or if you're interested. In that book, James Clear wrote called Atomic Habits, he talks about the power of 1%, the idea that a small change, a 1% shift today will lead to profound change over time. So you might want to ask yourself, which strategy aligns most with your motivation style that we talked about? Is it automating one bill pay, scheduling a money date to talk about your goals and your own financial psychology with a partner, or giving an account a nickname or a visual tie to work toward your goals? If you are able to set a goal, identify one action step or system that you might implement this week. With that, I do want to share a few resources. Note that if you're overwhelmed, you're not alone in that. There's definitely support available that is judgment-free from our financial coaches. I'll have a slide on that here in a second, to our debt management partner, GreenPath, to United Way 211, which is a great one-stop shop for getting connected with any resource you might need to get connected to for whatever you might need support with. Our financial coaches are free. You don't need to be a member with the credit union to use their services. They're one-on-one or family financial coaching where you're able to meet with that person, work toward budgeting, credit, savings, debt repayment goals, or just talk through financial psychology and get some clarity in that space. You can go to int.com/coaching or scan that QR code there to get connected with them. The last thing I want to leave you all with is a chance to win. So we're running a survey that happens where we draw a winner at the end of each quarter. It's a chance to win $50. So if you would like to fill it out, I believe it's 7 questions about our presentation and me as a presenter. You can scan that QR code or go to int.com/finedsurvey. Note those capitalizations are sensitive for the URL. And again, thank you all so much for joining us today. If you have anybody you think would really benefit from today's presentation, we are presenting it again later in the month, and we have lots of other webinars for whatever financial topic might pique your interest. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to hang out on this slide for a second, and if there are any questions, send them over and I'll answer them next. Have a great day. Bye. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop share. I'm going to wait about 10 more seconds to see if there are any questions, and then I'm going to end the webinar. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely day. We'll see you at another webinar. Bye.